The old oak tree stood alone on the far edge of the prairie, its roots gripping the earth like the fingers of time itself. Its branches twisted toward the sky, dark against the faint light of approaching dawn, a shape both familiar and unsettling to anyone who dared look too long. For decades, it had been a landmark for travelers, a gathering point for storms, and a silent witness to the quiet tragedies of the land. On this particular morning, the prairie was still, wrapped in a thin veil of mist. The faintest breeze moved through the grass, carrying with it the smell of damp soil. From the shadows near the ridge, a young farmhand named Eli spotted movement beneath the oak's gnarled canopy. A lone figure worked there in silence, a shovel cutting into the earth with steady, deliberate thrusts. The sound was faint, but in the stillness of the hour, it carried like a whisper. The man's movements were urgent, each glance over his shoulder sharper than the last. In the growing light, Eli recognized him, Thomas Grady, a man whose name traveled on the wind with both respect and unease. The bundle he carried was small, wrapped in cloth so tightly that the shape within could not be guessed. He lowered it into the freshly dug earth, then began to cover it, pressing the soil down with a final, decisive motion. When it was done, Grady stood for a long moment, his hands on the handle of the shovel, breathing hard as though the act had taken more than just strength. Then he turned and walked away without looking back. From his hidden place, Eli remained still, his eyes fixed on the patch of disturbed soil beneath the old oak. He didn't know what had been buried there, but something in the air told him it was not meant to be found. By midday, the quiet of the prairie had shifted. Eli hadn't spoken of what he'd seen, but small towns have a way of knowing things without words. In the dim corner of the general store, two ranchers murmured over sacks of grain, their voices low but sharp with curiosity. They'd seen Thomas Grady that morning, too, walking back along the ridge with his boots heavy with dirt. The story began to grow before anyone had the facts to hold it steady. Some swore it was stolen money from the stagecoach robbery 5 years back, hidden away until the heat died down. Others whispered it was something far darker, a weapon, perhaps, or evidence of a killing long buried in the town's history. A few, with more superstitious leanings, claimed Grady had been cursed, and what he buried was meant to keep the curse from spilling onto Hollow Bend. By nightfall, the oak tree had become more than just a tree. Its silhouette against the moonlit sky was now a marker of secrets, a place people passed by without slowing their horses. Mothers pulled their children close when riding that stretch of prairie, and men who once bragged about their fearlessness began to take the long way home. Eli, keeping his silence, watched it all unfold. The rumors carried a life of their own, but none matched the strange weight he'd felt in the air that morning, the kind that told him the truth was both simpler and more dangerous than anyone guessed. Days passed, but the image of Thomas Grady at the old oak tree refused to leave Eli's mind. It settled into him like a splinter, small, unseen, but impossible to ignore. The more he tried to push it aside, the sharper it seemed to press against his thoughts. Every time he worked the fields, his eyes drifted toward that distant silhouette, the branches swaying like slow, deliberate gestures calling him closer. The prairie, normally a place of comfort for Eli, now seemed to hold its breath whenever he was near the ridge. The air grew heavier there, the wind quieter, as though the land itself was guarding the patch of disturbed soil. At night, he found himself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what kind of secret could be worth burying in such a place, and why Grady had chosen that tree of all others. By the week's end, the pull became more than curiosity. It was a need, an itch that no work or distraction could scratch. Eli began planning in his head, when to go, what to bring, and how to make sure no one would see him. The oak tree waited, patient and silent, as if it knew he would come eventually. And deep down, Eli knew that once he stepped beneath its branches, there would be no turning back. The night Eli chose was moonless, the kind where the prairie seemed to disappear into a black sea of nothing. He moved quietly, every footstep measured, the cold air biting at his skin. The only sounds were the soft creak of leather from his boots and the occasional rustle of grass underfoot. The oak tree emerged slowly from the darkness, its twisted branches stretching outward like arms. Even without light, Eli could feel its presence, ancient, unshakable, and somehow aware of him. The ground beneath it looked untouched to anyone passing by, but Eli's eyes searched for the faint line, the subtle shift in earth where Grady's hands had worked that he knelt and pressed his palm against the soil. It was cooler than the ground around it, holding on to a dampness that made the hairs on his arms stand up. Pulling a small spade from his pack, he began to dig, careful not to make a sound that would carry in the still night. The deeper he went, the more the air seemed to thicken, the darkness around him feeling less like absence and more like a presence pressing in. Somewhere far off, a lone coyote called, its cry cutting through the night like a warning. Eli kept digging, driven by the same force that had kept him awake for days. At last, the spade struck something solid. Not stone, something smoother, colder. He paused, his breath catching in the chilled air, realizing that whatever he'd uncovered had been waiting here far longer than he had. Eli brushed the remaining soil away with trembling hands, revealing the object in full. It was a wooden box, its surface worn smooth with age but sealed tightly, as though it had been shut against the world for decades. The metal hinges were dulled with rust, yet the lock remained unbroken. The air around him felt heavier now, the night unnaturally still, as if even the wind was holding back. His fingers hovered over the box, hesitant to disturb whatever lay inside. A part of him wanted to cover it again and walk away, to pretend he had never come here. But the pull that had brought him to this moment refused to let go. When he finally pried the box open, the faint scent of cedar and something far older escaped into the cold air. Inside lay a bundle of yellowed papers, brittle with time, tied neatly with a faded ribbon. Resting atop them was a small silver locket, its surface engraved with initials he instantly recognized, initials that didn't belong to Thomas Grady, but to a woman long whispered about in the town's oldest stories. Beneath the papers was a revolver, wrapped carefully in cloth, its metal dark but polished as though it had been cherished. Eli understood then the box was not simply a container of objects, but of a secret that bound lives, betrayals, and blood. And if Thomas Grady had gone to such lengths to hide it, the truth inside was dangerous enough to change everything in Hollow Bend. Eli closed the box slowly, the weight of it settling into his chest. He knew that from this night on, nothing, not his life, not the town, would remain the same.